So we're going to talk a little bit more about coasts and flooding. That's the nice thing about being in Morningside Heights. We're 100 feet above sea level here, so other universities may have a problem. Actually, our new campus will have a problem because they're at 10 feet above sea level. So the new business school building's very close to sea level. SEPA, 100 feet above sea level. It's good to be in Morningside Heights. Anyway, let's hear about Coastal Communities Adaptation Act, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we've learned this semester. Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Weigel, and today I'm going to be presenting the Coastal Communities Adaptation Act, which aims to protect communities like this one in Melbourne, Florida. Coastal communities make up about 40% of the population of the entire United States, so it's really a number of people that we're looking at here. So I wanted to give a big thanks to my entire team that worked so hard this summer, with special thanks to my task team, Ichu Liu and Ji Chen, and Erin Dickinson, our manager, plus our faculty advisor, the wonderful Howard Apson. Today we're going to discuss how the bill aims to make these communities more resilient. We're going to look at the environmental problems posed against coastal communities, as well as some solutions to these problems. Finally, we're going to look at different ways to measure success within the bill. The Coastal Communities Adaptation Act has the goal of making these communities more resilient to climate change and coastal storms. There are four major components to this bill. The first are research and grants to fortify coastal communities. The second are revolving funds allocated to coastal states to make them more resilient. The third is the Built to Last stamp, the selling of which will support the research that we previously discussed. And finally, the bill aims to catalog research about risk reduction resilience measures for the coastal communities in coordination with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Coastal communities are faced with four different environmental issues as climate change worsens, one of the most talked about being sea level rise. This graph here shows us that since 1993, we've seen about 66 milliliters of global sea level rise. There is a lot of debate, however, as to what we can see in the future in regards to sea level rise. This is calculated using complicated climate models that require a lot of inputs and a lot of assumptions to be made, so the results vary. One estimate by NASA says that we'll be getting 3.2 millimeters of global sea level rise per year moving forward. As sea levels rise, coastal erosion increases due to the removal of sediment or bedrock from the shoreline. In some low-lying areas where terrain is very flat, such as the Gulf Coast, a small rise in sea level can result in a severe loss of sediment and lead to significant erosion. In fact, in the United States, we experience about $500 million of property loss each year due to coastal erosion, and this is covered by loss of land as well as damage to structures. Erosion is not the only factor playing into coastal damage, however. Coastal storms are intensifying as a result of climate change, which leaves coastal communities increasingly at risk. There's debate in the scientific community as to what the frequency of these storms will look like moving forward. Some scientists believe they'll become more frequent, some scientists believe they'll become less frequent. But overall, there is consensus that the storms will become more intense. We've been seeing in past years that the average dollar value of damage post-storm is reaching estimates over $1 billion. Some situations are Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina. Finally, the fourth problem faced by our coastal communities is flooding, which occurs because of sea level rise, storm surges, and heavy periods of precipitation. The inundation of normally dry land with significant amounts of water can cause loss of life, destroy infrastructure, and impact natural systems along the coast. This effect is enhanced by coastal development in many coastal states. In many coastal states, we're seeing development in flood-prone regions is outpacing development in other areas, which continues to put these communities at risk. While these problems are ever present, we're not without tools to address them. There are three different solutions posed in this bill to address the issues of climate change and coastal storms. The first is the implementation of nature-based features, which are man-made structures meant to mitigate the effects of climate change and coastal storms. One of the most common are seawalls, which are physical walls built parallel to the ocean. These are meant to deflect the impact of storm surges and waves. We actually have estimates saying that by 2040, we'll be seeing 50,000 miles of seawalls along the U.S. coastline to protect us against moderate sea level rise. Another type of nature-based feature are living shorelines, which are a combination of coastal vegetation and hard, low-lying structures. These are designed to improve coastal resilience by providing shoreline stabilization. The second type of resilience measure posed in this bill are natural features, which entail the building, enhancing, or protecting of natural features that support the biological, chemical, and geological processes we experience. These features are imperative in absorbing and deflecting coastal storm surges and flooding, all while supporting local biodiversity. Coral reefs, like these here in Hawaii, deflect about 97% of wave energy on average, and they're the first line of defense for coastal communities against flooding. Coastal sand dunes protect low-lying developed coastal areas from elevated water levels and waves associated with coastal storms. Beach grasses and driftwoods strengthen the dunes by trapping sand to prevent it from blowing away, which protects the coastline. Coastal wetlands impede the movement of storm surges and distribute it among floodplains. Areas that are protected by wetlands experience 20% less damage on average from a storm than areas that have lost their wetlands. Unfortunately, we're slowly losing these natural features in the face of climate change and coastal development. Supporting the growth and protection of these natural features will benefit the local coastal communities in the short term and benefit the global community in the long term. The third resilience measure posed in the bill are non-structural measures, which don't entail modifying anything physical, but instead entail modifying behavior through public policy. This image on the left here is of a flood warning system from Maryland from just this past month. The system clearly shows areas that are at moderate risk and high risk of flooding, and residents in those areas were warned. This technology is this is just not about the technology, it's also about the involvement between the people and the flood emergency response teams and the updates that they're constantly getting. We've had some version of flood warning systems since the late 1970s, and they've been proven to increase resident safety. These systems are important, but considering the increase in development in flood-prone regions, additional safety measures are required, specifically designing more resilient building codes. Nature-based and natural features are not enough to protect the coast. In addition, the buildings need to be constructed to withstand climate change and the coastal storms. This building here, right there, is from Mexico Beach, Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Michael. It's the only building that's still standing in the area, and that's because this owner decided to build his building to higher standards than local building code required. If you look carefully, you'll see that this building stands on pilings. What this does is this allows floodwaters to surge below the building without damaging the structural integrity of the home. Resilient building codes are complicated and involved, and they require the cooperation of many different departments in order to be effective. In order to measure the success of the Coastal Communities Adaptation Act, we need two inputs. One, money, and the second is space. You need funding to support the research to design and understand the best resilience measures to protect the coasts. But once you have chosen your resilience measure, you need enough space to implement it so it works effectively. The process of implementing these measures is multifold. Politicians, scientists, construction teams, engineers, and civilians all need to work together to choose the resilience measure that is the most cost and risk effective for their local community. We have three separate tools to assess two different measures of success. The first is measuring the extent of flood and erosion. The second is measuring the dollar value of property loss after a storm. Satellite images are ideal for getting large-scale measurements of coastal erosion, while ground measurements are ideal for tracking the rate of erosion from a specific event, like a large coastal storm. The flood insurance claims are a key indicator of the effect of coastal resilience measures. If you look at flood insurance claims post-storm before a resilience measure like seawalls are implemented, and you look in the same area at the flood insurance claims after, it will give you a very clear picture of how successful that measurement was. Now, the outcome of this is the goal of the entire bill, to improve the resilience of coastal communities against natural disasters and climate change. It's important to remember that we're all part of the solution, and everybody needs to work together within their community to make sure they're choosing the best solution that works as well as possible to protect our coastal communities for the future to come. Thank you. Any questions?
So when looking at those houses that have the higher standard of fortifications against sea level rise, like pylons and stilts,
Yep.
is there a risk that in surging and incoming tides from storms can ruin the foundation below the pylons, or do those pylons generally protect the foundation as well?
Yeah, so they're engineered to prevent against such things. The way these pilings work is they're actually driven very far into the ground, significantly deeper than they actually will be above ground. That's probably 9 or 10 feet above ground, that first level, and they're dozens of feet below ground to really be supportive and so they don't move when such storms come through. All of these different measures are engineered. They're not, they don't just change building codes like that. So they engineer it based on the estimated storm surges and wind impacts they'll be dealing with.
Excellent presentation, Julia.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My question was, you said that natural features are declining. Is there anything in the bill that speaks to conservation or, engineering, biomimicry of coral reefs or something to that effect?
The goal of the bill is to protect coastal communities, so that's the primary aim. But you inherently protect coastal communities by enhancing the natural features along the shore, like wetlands. So that is addressed in the bill. It's addressed more broadly, so it gives room to work on every different type of feature. But yes, it does look at protecting and enhancing things such as wetlands and coral reefs.
Hi. In your research, did you come across any sort of information regarding whether it'd be more cost effective to or the concept of managed retreat instead of rebuilding or instituting all these additional costs? Would it be more cost effective to just sort of retreat following a disaster instead of building in these, constantly prone areas?
It was something we talked about internally, but managed retreat is actually outside of the scope of the bill. The goal is to protect the communities as they stand now. And you do have to consider the fact of urban sprawl and just the fact that the population is increasing. So it does limit the options there, but the bill, I would say that it's outside the scope of the bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
So first, let's give an applause to all 5 briefers. They were great. And yeah, Jeff, they could manage their retreat and go interior to where the rivers are overflowing, or to where the farmlands are getting swamped. I have a feeling there's no retreat. So no retreat, no surrender. We got to stay where we are. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what this semester was about. I know everybody was into their subject matter, and so you thought the workshop was about flooding or whales or bees. But actually, the workshop is not about the subject matter. It's about the process of learning about the subject matter and acting on it. You're going to work on a lot of different projects through your career and a lot of different subjects. I'll give my own career as an example. The first thing I did at EPA was work on the water program. Then I worked on toxic waste. Then I worked on sea level rise and underground storage tanks, the nuclear waste, and then at least 10 other issues over the next decade. And so the question really is, first, how do you learn about this science? How do you become well-versed enough so you can actually frame policy solutions. And one of the unique features of this program is we don't think you can make environmental policy if you don't know something about how to acquire scientific knowledge. This is the only master's program, public policy program with an environmental concentration that requires you learn environmental science. And it's not the pure environmental science that you might get from Professor Palmer's department for their own students or the D's professors for theirs. It's a different version of it for policy people, because here's the thing. You've got to learn stuff you don't know anything about. So how do you do that? Well, first, you find an expert who knows. And so whether you find them in person or you find something they've written, if somebody really knows something, they're usually pretty good at explaining to people that don't know very much about it. In fact, you could almost always tell who's a real expert from who's not by their ability to explain their subject matter to people that aren't experts. But if you're working in a policy area, you've got to find those people and find out what they know and get them to explain it to you. So that's one of the most important aspects of what we've done this semester. Think how much more you know about your topic and the science of it today than you knew about it the day after Memorial Day when we first threw this at you. Totally new information for some of you. For some of you, maybe you knew more about it, but nobody knew as much as they know today. I would argue that. The other thing we learned is a lot of process lessons. How do you work together? How do you build on people's strengths and also deal with people's weaknesses? How do you deal with that free rider who was supposed to produce something and they didn't show up, or the work didn't get there on time? You know, the train's leaving the station. This is how the real world works. There's no incompletes when you're at work. The project is either done or you're left behind. And if you're left behind, that's a bad thing for you professionally. So that's what we simulate in the workshop. You have an output every week. There's no incompletes. There's no late. Everything has to be done on time. And one of the things we're focusing on, frankly, is the importance of time. And we always talk about money as the resource that's most important, but it's actually time. You know, getting people together over the course of a period of time to work on a problem. The problem tends not to be getting better while you're not doing something. So everything you work on should have a sense of urgency. You know, the 400 whales, okay? The bees, the coasts, all the things that we work on. And, you know, and it extends to really every area of public policy, because by definition, something doesn't get on the policy agenda if the market's already dealing with it and it's being addressed. It gets on the policy agenda because we're not able to do it. And so everything that we work on has a sense of urgency. The other thing is how to make choices. You had to leave out in your 10-minute briefings a lot of the stuff you wanted to talk about. You had to figure out what's important and what's less important. There's nothing unimportant. It's just what's most important. And those choices are at the center of your education here. Learning to convey and to understand what's important. And, you know, it's not easy, and you're going to debate it. And that's actually part of the process. You know, what is important in addressing these problems is something that you evolve and you learn over time. There's no right or wrong answers to this. So I was very impressed by these briefings today. I have to say I'm almost always impressed, but you know, it's always, you know, today's were really unusually good. And I think last year's were also unusually good. And so they seem to, in my mind, be getting better. And I don't quite know why that is. I guess maybe you guys are just getting smarter and smarter, but I actually think that we're getting to be a little bit more sophisticated in our understanding of all of these issues, that it's becoming a sort of cultural phenomenon over the last 30 or 40 years. More and more people understand these environmental issues, and we hear about them more often. So with that, I just want to say congratulations, and I'm looking forward to focusing on these bills for my area of expertise next semester, because, see, here, I don't know science, but I do know management. So next semester, I actually know something about what the workshop's about, so I'll be able to lend more of my area of expertise. So anyway, congratulations, everybody, and I'll see you soon.